thank you for coming. This is going to be an hour of really good advice and help about what you can do if you haven't got lots of savings for your future. And it's going to be an open Q&A webinar, so feel free either to put your hand up, and wave at us. My glamorous assistant Izzy will be looking out to see who is. You can press the hand thing at the bottom, reactions, or you can put something in the chat, any of those. And no question is too dumb. Honestly, this is a safe space for questions, and it's quite possible that any question that you think is dumb is actually something that other people are wondering themselves. So don't hold yourselves back if you have questions. Now, I am delighted to be joined by 3 savings and pensions experts in this session. This webinar is being sponsored by PensionBee, which is why it's lovely and free, so we can thank PensionBee for that. And we are honoured to have Romina Savova, CEO of PensionBee. Give us a wave, Romy. Thank you. Who knows everything there is to know about pensions. We also have the personal finance writer at the Telegraph, Jessica Beard, wave at us, Jessica, who specialises in pensions. And also the financial advisor, David Braithwaite from Citrus Financial Management. And a big wave from David. Thank you very much. Now, I will start the ball rolling, but get ready to ask your questions, because we've only got an hour for this. And I do find quite often by the time it gets to 5:02, there's about 6 other questions. So ask it early on if you can. So Romy, I'm going to start with you, if it's all right.
Sure.
If someone is, say, in their 50s and they don't have a pension, is it still worth starting one? And how late can you keep contributing to that pension?
It is absolutely worth still starting a pension. You can start a pension pretty much at any time, as long as you remain eligible for tax relief, which can be all the way, up into your 70s, and as long as you're working, really. And a lot of people will find that they haven't started a pension by the time they get to 50, because maybe they've taken breaks from the workforce, or maybe they haven't had the opportunity to be automatically enrolled by their employer. So while the general practice and rule is start as early as you can, the reality is for some people that is going to be in their 50s. And the reason it makes sense is because there are still incredibly effective tax incentives for you to be saving into your pension. So generally speaking, you will get at least a 25% tax top up that can go directly into your pension. And if you are a higher rate or additional rate taxpayer, you could get even more back directly through your self-assessment. So the tax benefits are absolutely still there for you in your 50s, and it does make sense to start if you haven't started yet.
And do you think it might be the case with some people that they think they haven't got a pension, but actually there are a few, maybe small ones, but a few bits and pieces from old employers, and they just didn't realize that they're there? How can you find out if that is the case?
Yes, that is absolutely possible. And we see this happening quite regularly. Because of the way the pension system works, you may actually have a pension that you've completely forgotten about or lost track of, or didn't even know existed, because of the way that employers automatically put their employees into pensions. So if you were working from 2012 onwards, it is quite likely that you would have been automatically enrolled by an employer into a workplace pension, because that's currently the law. But even before 2012, if you were employed, your employer may well have had an employee pension plan that you've been provided for into. And it can be tricky to remember these, because what happens is on your first day or on your second day, you'll get a bunch of paperwork that you need to sign, and it's never totally fully explained exactly how this thing works. And many years ago, most pension providers didn't have online access, so you won't necessarily have been given an online account to check. You may have received a paper statement in the post. That's another clue that a pension could exist. But if you've moved house, you may not even have gotten that. So So it's worth going back through your employment history and getting in touch with your HR department and seeing if you were enrolled in a pension plan. You can also use the government's free pension tracing service, which is online, and you can type in your old employer and they will give you the current match that they hold for the pension provider associated with that employer. So I think it is actually worth looking into, because if you have a pension that you had maybe 10 years ago from an employer, then it could have grown over the last 10 years, and you may be quite pleasantly surprised with what you find.
Oh, yes. I like that idea. It's like finding a fiver in the pocket of a jacket that you haven't worn for ages. It's like free money. And it's just lovely to think that you might possibly have a pension that you didn't even remember at all, with it. Even if it's £1,000 or something, it all helps, frankly.
Absolutely, it's your money.
Yes, exactly. Jessica, I'm going to move to you. Now, you've been writing about pensions and savings for some time now. What would you say are the big issues for people of different ages who are just not managing to put away much for their futures? What are the reasons for this?
Pensions always seem quite a long way off, and from the people I speak to often, there are always more immediate priorities, whether it's a holiday that people are saving up for, a wedding, children in their 20s or 30s, school fees, that sort of thing often gets in the way. But one big thing with pensions, I'd say, is it's always really difficult to know how much you actually need to save, which means, how much do you need by the time you retire? It's hard to get to that figure, but also then working backwards. So am I saving enough? Am I on track to live comfortably in retirement? And I think that's one big barrier that makes it difficult for people to know and save enough for. I know that automatic enrolment, as Romy was mentioning, has been really successful in getting people to save towards a pension. But a lot of the experts that I speak to warn that it's not always enough, and you might be putting 8% aside every year, but when you get to retirement, you might find that you're still a bit short. And I think it's this knowledge gap that really is a big problem there.
It's a good point. Actually, I'll go to David for this, because I mean, what Jessica says is so true, and I get asked this a lot. How much is enough? How much, David, do you think somebody should have when they retire to be comfortable, at least?
It's a great question, and I think what you've hit on there, the word comfortable, because a lot of people, when you Google retirement and look at pensions, you look at elderly retired people, a lot of the Google images come up with this couple on the beach and they've got the jumper over the shoulders and it's all heavenly and it's wonderful. Most people, Jasmine, just want to be comfortable. They want to know they can pay their bills, go on a few holidays, see the grandchildren, that type of thing. So pensions can be quite disengaging from that point of view. And as Jessica was saying, it's knowing how much to put in. And the point to start is exactly what Jessica was saying, is like, okay, imagine if you were retired today and you have no mortgage, the children have left home, whatever you want to have, what sort of income would you like to live on? And it's a case of working out what size pot that you actually need to fund that income, and then working backwards to tell you what you've got to pay in based on certain assumptions to get you to that pot in the first place. Now, this is where it gets complicated, because people, you can see them almost glazing over. They go, oh, crikey, how am I going to work this out? There are loads of online calculators and tools out there where you can work all this sort of thing out to tell you what you should be paying in. But as a real rough rule of thumb, if you haven't started anything for your pension, it's always been known as roughly half your age as a percentage of your salary. So if you were 30 years old when you're starting your pension, it should be about 15%. Now, for most people, that's largely unattainable because you've got mortgages to pay, you've got bills to pay. It's really hard to try and put money into something which is paying your future self. Because for most people, it's quite disengaging thinking about getting older. Retired people is what other people seem to, that's when I'm older, I'll worry about it later on. It's very hard to engage with that when you're perhaps in your 30s, but then when you're into your 40s, you start getting a bit more interested. And then in your 50s, it starts becoming really real. So what we find is that the older that we all get, the interest in those pensions exponentially grows as well. But it's about taking stock of where you're at. It is about finding all those old pensions that you've got and actually taking the time to sit down and think about it, and getting help if you can't do it yourself. But it's about that start point of actually facing up to it, because the older you're going to get, Jasmine, the problem is you're going to get more interested in it. Yes. And by then it might be too late. And that's the problem, is it's leaving it too late and being fearful of these pensions in the first place because they're a worry. I often say that when we go and see people A typical client, if you've got a bank statement, you'll open it, take out the envelope, and you'll put it away, and that's great. And your gas bill, electricity bill, I can always spot a pension statement. It's in an A4 envelope, and it's been put back in it. Because somehow people like to sort of hide it away. And I can see Hillary sort of smiling there as well. But often people look at it and they go, oh, that's Aviva. I'll need to look at that one day. They put it back in the envelope and file it away. And it's almost because it's hidden a bit. It's, oh, I need to. But there's also a guilt thing about people not knowing. And this is why this webinar is great. There's a guilt thing that we feel that we should know more about pensions. But how should we when we're not taught this sort of thing at school and it's not our expertise? You know, this is what I've trained to do. This is what the panel here are all doing as well. We live with it and we breathe it all day long. But for average Joe who's there, there's a fear and a guilt of thinking, oh, I should know about this, so I won't ask because I feel like I should know about it. There's nothing wrong with that, which is why you said at the beginning of this, Jasmine, there's no such thing as a silly question. This is what we should be doing, is talking about it and getting some understanding there and talking in plain English and engaging people with pensions rather than leaving them in the A4 envelopes.
Well, absolutely. And the other thing, I mean, I always find with everything pretty much about personal finance, not just pensions, there's that guilt that I should have done whatever it was. You know, I should have done this 20 years ago, or why didn't my grandparents set up a trust fund for me? Or why didn't I put more money? You know, always there's this sort of guilt thing. So how do you deal with that? What do you do? Because you must get this, David, a lot with your clients. They must get, oh, an idiot, I should have done this. What do you say when they say that?
Well, the first thing is to reassure them and say, look, this is absolutely normal. Everybody comes to me with that sort of situation. The best one was, I think, it was actually one of my closest friends, and his children are our godchildren. He came to see me with his pensions in a black bin bag. And he came into the office and emptied it all out. He said, I feel awful. I don't even open the envelopes anymore. He stopped even doing that. So the point was to start with kind of putting everything out on your dining room table, opening all your statements up and just taking stock of what you've got. And it's like playing a game of Snap. You think, well, that's my Aviva. I put that on the Aviva pile. That's the workplace one that I worked here. And actually work out what you've got and find all those pots using the pension tracing service to make sure that you really have found everything out. And even if it's a pot with £1,000 in, if it was a savings account with £1,000 in it and it was cash, you pay attention to it. But because it's a pension, it just feels a little bit more remote. It feels a bit further away. It doesn't feel like proper money. And it's difficult with pensions as well, because you can't, for example, you're going to go and buy a new car. You can sit in it, you can test drive it, you can choose the colors, you get a feel for it, and you can have it. With the pension, it's pay into this and you'll probably be all right at some point in the future, but you won't know what it's going to look like until you get there. So it's going to be that kind of disengaging for people, because they're going to, yeah, that's how I feel. But it's our job as advisors and PensionBee and using all these online calculators to try and engage people. But how you start is by facing the truth. All progress starts by telling the truth. I've got a big saying about that. Tell the truth, find out what you've got, and then start building a plan from there. And you might find that actually you're doing better than what you think you are. But it's all starting with the truth.
Well, lovely. Now I've got a question from Ken here, Kerry. What are your now I know Romy will have something to say about this. What are your thoughts on pension consolidation? I did this last year, but worried if I want to change and use another company to do this, that it could be bad for my pension. Is changing companies a few times bad? Romy, what do you think here?
Well, let me start off with pension consolidation generally. It can be a really, really helpful way for you to stay on top of all of your pension savings, because if the goal is to figure out how much you need to be saving so you can have a great pension pot by the time you retire and one that keeps you comfortable, then it's a lot easier to keep track of what you have if it's all in one place, rather than if it's sitting in those piles on the dining room table and you have to keep track of what's going on in the 9 or 10 different piles that you have. So consolidation helps you to bring that all together. It can help you to get the total balance that you have online. If you use a service like PensionBee, you would also have an online calculator that helps you figure out how much you should be paying in based on how much you want to get out and certain reasonable assumptions. And so you can do a lot of that back solving electronically. The other reason for consolidation is that if you put all of your pension pots together, you are very often able to get a reduced fee, because the total amount that you would be having in one one pot, can qualify for a large pot fee discount at many service providers, whereas if you have a lot of smaller scattered pots, you might not reach those discount qualifications in all of the various places. So there are certainly quite a lot of strong reasons as to why you may want to consolidate. There are a couple of things to be aware of. So if you have a pension that is, older, so probably before 2012, perhaps established sometime in the 90s, you need to make sure that you're not giving up on any valuable guarantees. Some of these old pensions come with things called guaranteed annuity rates, which give you valuable options at the time of retirement. They may also have a protected pension age, so you may be even able to access your money earlier. And very, very few may even have an exit fee, which is a negative feature of old pensions. So if you have one of the older style pensions, you'll want to look a little bit more closely to make sure that you're not going to incur an exit fee or that you're not going to give up a valuable benefit. But for most people, those factors won't apply. And when they do combine their pensions, they can reap those benefits. So once you have it in one place, then you can start using the features of that service. And if the features of that service don't necessarily suit you, then you can choose to move your pension again somewhere else where the features may be more suitable. And so what you'll want to compare is things like, what is my level of online accessibility? And does the pension that I have facilitate better saving options for me? Does it help me get on track for my retirement? That's the most important thing. And of course, you'll want to pick a provider that does do that for you. Again, if you move those pensions, those consolidated pensions in one pot into another pot, you'll want to make sure that you aren't incurring exit fees. And, again, that you are making the best decision, based on your exact needs, taking into account as well the fees of your new provider versus your old provider.
David, I see you've made a note here that you'd like to say something about this.
Yeah, it's for me, I think if you're looking at consolidating your pensions, to answer Kerry's question, there's no harm in keep moving it, but every time you're going to be doing it, you've got to watch if you're being charged by an advisor to do it every time. But also, as Romy was saying, about what you're giving up. So unless you drill down to the existing pensions and find out all the details about them, like, for example, have you got protected tax-free cash? That's another thing. We come across a pension the other day that had 48% tax-free cash instead of 25. If you moved it, you go down to the 25% default in the new scheme. So you could lose that. Guarantee annuity rates are really valuable at the moment, especially where the annuity market is awful. And what this is that the pension provider said, come to us for a pension, we'll give you a great annuity rate of income, hoping you probably never claim it. But they're really valuable things, because it's like having a savings account that would have offered you years ago paying 15%. It's those sort of figures. You could be 10 to 15% on those. So it is about the cost and the charges. It is about making sure you're not missing out on something by transferring it. And I urge caution for people, if they are looking at consolidating it, doing it themselves, to make sure they're really aware of what they're losing, but also what they're gaining. So yes, it's much easier to have it in one pot. Yes, you could potentially save charges. You could end up paying more. There's different sides to the coin on this. So you've just been really careful. The downside about consolidating a pension, once you've moved it, you really can't go back. So once you've lost it, if you then find out later on, oh, actually, I wish I hadn't done that, I've got that guarantee annuity rate, I'll go back, it's too late. The door's closed. So you do have to be careful.
Right, so be careful of that. Well, really helpful advice. Thank you very much, because I think that this is something that a lot of people are wondering about, because a lot of people, I did it myself. I've had few little pensions, and then I did consolidate them, and it kind of makes sense, but then you think, should I not? I'm going to go back to you, Jessica, because we're talking about pensions a lot, but it's not just pensions, of course, that you can use to develop a retirement fund, because ultimately that's what we're really talking about. So pensions are a good thing, but what are the other things that we can use to create a nice little nest egg?
So if you're saving for the long term, the one thing not to do is to leave it in an easy access savings account, because that's not going to earn you very much over the long run. But there are several other things that you can look at, especially individual savings accounts. There are several different types of those. Depending on what you're hoping to do with that and how old you are, you should look at different ones. So there is a cash ISA. There's also a stocks and shares ISA, which means that you can grow that money and invest it so that it snowballs over the long term. And there's also the lifetime ISA, but that's only open to anyone who's under the age of 40. The good thing with the LISA, the lifetime ISA, is that the government also tops that up. So you can pay in up to £4,000 a year. Then on top of that, you can get £1,000. So it's 25% of whatever you put in, the government will add into it. So that's quite handy for people who want to save quickly and get a bit of a boost with that.
I am a bit of a fan of LISAs. Tragically, I can't have one myself, but it sounds like a great idea, frankly. You can only put up to 4,000 a year or tax year into them, can't you? Which is a shame.
Exactly. And I mean, there's two things that you can do with them. Either you can buy your first property with them, or your first home, and if you don't, it means your money's locked away until later on and you use it for retirement. So it's one of the two things.
Useful. I've got another question. This one's from Rebecca, and she says, I'm newly self-employed. Welcome to the fold. I had an old pension with a company which has now stopped. How do I start a pension on my own? And can I transfer my old pension into a new one? Or should I leave it as is? Romy, I'm going to go to you again for this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a lot of self-employed people find themselves in this situation because the way that our current pension system is structured is that if you're employed by an employer, you'll be automatically enrolled. And if you're self-employed, then you have to make pension provision for yourself. So providers like PensionBee offer self-employed pensions where you can start a pension from scratch. You can contribute yourself as a sole trader, or you can contribute from a limited company if that is the type of self-employment that you have, and you can absolutely bring your old pension from your old employer into your new pension where you pay in as being self-employed. When you're self-employed, some of the things you'll want to think about are how easy is it for me to start and stop contributions. A lot of times a big factor is, how successful the month has been, or how successful the quarter has been. And so you'll want to find a pension provider that makes it easy for you to make one-off contributions if that's what you prefer, or to make regular contributions if you feel comfortable with the ongoing amount.
Great. Jessica, so speaking as a freelancer myself, and I've always been freelance, basically unemployable, I think, I have often thought that it would be really helpful if there was something which, as Romy mentioned, if you're employed, you are automatically enrolled, and it would be great if freelancers and self-employed could have something like this. Is this something that comes up in your letters bag? Do you find at the Telegraph? Do freelancers have a particular problem with pensions, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we get a lot of letters about this, sending emails, people just writing in, asking all sorts of different questions because they don't know how to go about it. The problem is it's hard to know who to ask, where to get help, and who to trust, really. They say to us, everyone wants to gain something out of it, they feel. And so they're concerned about going to different platforms in case they're not getting the best service or advice on it. And I think that it would be good to get more of a centralized system for self-employed people, because what we find is people just put it off and they say, I've been self-employed for 15 years and every year I think about it, but I never really do anything about it. Yeah. One thing we tell them often is the Money and Pension Service, the government service helps out with that and can offer kind of basic advice on how to start up, but it's important to get going is what we usually tell them, and we can look into it for them often and help with that.
That's really good. David, obviously, this is your job. You are a financial advisor. So if Rebecca came to you with this issue, so she's got an old pension with her former employer, she's now wanting to set up something for herself. She's wondering whether to move the old one into the new, which sounds sensible, as Romy said. How much would it cost, really, for a financial advisor to advise on that? If she said, go on, here you are, you just do it for me. How much would that cost on the whole?
They can vary. So I'm talking just about us, but also other advisors as well. You probably, if you were thinking about, let's say a fee, you can get financial advisors that will work on purely a fixed fee. That was just work on a project-based fee. Some of them work on a percentage of the pot that you're actually moving. It's normally about 3% of the pot that you're actually moving. But the big significant difference, a lot of people would think, oh, but that's a lot of money. The difference is if you do it yourself, you're doing it yourself. If you're doing it through an advisor, and I'm not blowing for me, I'm not promoting me here, but if you do it through a regulated financial advisor, they're often taking the responsibility on of that advice as well. So they're on the hook for it. So it's their job to write off to your existing provider, find out all about what the scheme that you've already got has, what it hasn't got, the good points, the bad points, the fees, the costs, and then to actually move that pension to a new plan would have to be justifiable. They can't just do it because you don't like the logo of the company that you use and it's not good enough. It's got to be calculated out and shown that it's in your best interest to actually move that pension. Otherwise, they're making you worse off from having met them. So that's where a lot of financial advisors get a lot of the bad rap, because they used to work on commission before. So it's in their interest to make you move the pension. Yeah. And it's changing now. So they're all fee-based now, based on if you're getting pensions work. But the key is, talk to somebody, talk to your family and your friends. You can go on to unbiased.co.uk and find an advisor in your area. But I'd probably look at your family and friends. Who is it they use? And get quotes. It isn't just a case of finding the first person and going, oh, yeah, that's it. If you're not sure, you move on to the next person and find who you think's got your best interest, you have a connection with, that you think, yeah, they talk my language, and that you trust. And that's the biggest thing that we find as financial advisors, is that we're here willing to help. But there's a massive trust issue, because people in the past feel that they've been ripped off, or my pension's at risk and it's not a good thing. I've heard horror stories. Yeah. So it's very hard to actually get that across to people, but you will certainly get what you pay for. But there are companies like PensionBee will let you do it yourself if that's the route you actually want to take. But it's just exercising that caution so you don't miss out on something unwittingly. A lot of the time we can save people from themselves, if that makes sense. Yes, but it's about progress, not perfection. It's not about hitting it all in one go. And if you can't afford all the money at the same time, start with something when you're self-employed, put in what you want, but make sure the pension provider is flexible enough, as we were talking with Romy earlier on, to make sure that you can fluctuate, stop, start, vary your contributions depending on how successful your business actually is.
Yeah, that's the important thing. Romy, if well, let's say Rebecca wanted to do this on PensionBee, what's the process of actually setting up a pension for yourself as a freelancer?
Well, our process is really straightforward. You can do it in about 5 minutes. You can open your account and add any information about old pensions that you may wish to transfer over. I tend to agree that it's important to make sure you're not giving up valuable benefits. We actually check for benefits before we do that transfer and let you know if we find any. We also check for exit fees and let you know if we find any over £10, so people can make a good and informed decision about that. I think that there is a misconception that opening up a pension is going to take you hours and hours of paperwork. But if you are time poor, as I think most self-employed people are, and I think especially women are, then it is nice to have a solution that can let you do it in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Marcia has put a question here. She says, I was informed a couple of years ago that a pension fund I had went bust. This is an ex-employer, and they're still working out if members will receive anything. Is there anything I can do? Jessica, what do you think about this? This is something, sort of thing you would cover a lot, I would imagine.
Yeah, often if employers go bust, you'll find that your pension could be protected by the pension protection fund, in which case you're likely to get 90% of the pension you've saved up already. So that's something to look into. You said it was a couple of years ago, so there should be information on that out already. You know, it's always tricky to know when it's happening in the moment, but that's something that you can go and look into, and then just ask them, get in touch with whoever you can. There should be contact details. Yeah, I think just to jump back for a quick minute, just to something David said, I think, you know, with trusting financial advice, if I might, trusting financial advisors, one thing that I would say is that, you know, just check that they are actually regulated. It's really good to speak to your family and friends and see who they're with, but too often I get calls and emails from people who did do that, and then they found that and these horror stories do happen, but I guess I speak to the people more so than not, because most days I get people writing in to say that they've lost their pension or whatever it is, and people have lost millions and everything. So, you know, it really is devastating for those people. So just, you know, trust advisors, but make sure they're regulated before going to them. You can check that out online. Yeah. Very good. Yes, very, very good point. And speaking of that, David, what do you have any? I mean, I'm sure again you've had clients coming, going, saying, "I thought I had a pension and it's gone. What do I do?" Is there anything that Marcia can do here, or does she have to just wait?
Well, there is a little bit of waiting game, but as Jessica was saying, when it falls into the Pension Protection Fund, the PPF, there is that safety net for those type of pensions so that you are protected and covered, because the rules all changed many, many years ago when pensions used to just disappear. If, however, there's an underlying, if it's a workplace scheme that you've maybe got with a separate pension provider, then I don't know any pension provider per se that may have gone bust in the last couple of years. It's more than likely going to be one of those final salary defined benefit ones, because they're the ones that are really struggling to keep up the payments to make sure they can meet all the promises and obligations. So it would be to get hold of the trustees. So somewhere in amongst all of your HR paperwork or some paperwork you've had from your pension, you probably used to get a statement once a year. And in there has been some coloured photographs of the trustees and the boss and all that sort of thing. There should be something in there that you can go back to and just find out. Or ring the Pension Protection Fund themselves and see what they can tell you. Nice.
Now we have another question here from Kerry. Now I may have this one wrong, Kerry says, I'm sure you don't, but is it the case that a pension is basically like a savings account? However, it's tax-free and there is tax relief on contributions? Very largely, yes, I think that's true. However, the money is invested and therefore returns aren't guaranteed quite, and your money is at risk. So the tax advantages could be pointless if your pension pot goes down or something happens to that pension provider. Well, true. What do you think about that, Romy? Because obviously you do, your company does invest these pensions.
Yes, I think that's actually a fairly accurate summary of what the pension savings vehicle is. It is a savings account for retirement, where when you put money in, the government adds a 25% tax top up, potentially more through your self-assessment. And then from the age of withdrawal, which is currently set at 55, you can withdraw 25% tax-free, and then you can withdraw the rest subject to your regular income tax. So the benefit of that is that you get to accumulate those savings into your pension pot over many, many, many years, and they accumulate tax-free. So as you make the returns over a 10, 20, 30, 40-year period, those returns are capital gains tax-free within the pension itself, and you automatically reinvest any of the gains again, meaning that you can grow that pension pot quite substantially. And this is particularly relevant for the tax top-up that you get, that free 25%, which you are also able to grow over time. And that is what can contribute to having a large pension. Now, I think that there can be a lot of misconceptions around that the way that pensions are managed, and the question we had about the employer going bankrupt and therefore the pension being impacted is actually really relevant here. In the past, most pensions were defined benefit pensions, meaning that your employer promised to pay you a certain salary in retirement. Now, if your employer does go bust, of course, those types of pensions will be impacted because they wouldn't be able to pay your salary into retirement, and the pension goes into the Pension Protection Fund. But the kind of pension that you're talking about is much more likely to be a defined contribution pension. So it means, yes, it is invested, and therefore it wouldn't be impacted by an employer's bankruptcy because there is a pension provider that is actually managing that money. And so the question then becomes, well, how is it invested? And is it going to be invested in a way that could impact you, detrimentally from a financial perspective and wipe off those tax benefits? Well, most pension providers, and certainly good pension providers, will invest your money in a diversified way, which means that they will take your pension and invest some of it in the United States stock market, in the UK stock market, in European stock market in other asset classes like bonds or commodities or real estate, and they will build up a portfolio of assets for you, which covers, all sorts of different investment classes in the world. And that's beneficial because if one investment class goes up while another goes down, then you have the protection of the one that went up compared to the one that went down. So diversification of investments is often referred to the only free lunch that you will get within savings, because the effects of it are so powerful. And so when you look at that investment strategy, one of the most important things to think about is this pension fund diversified? And if it is, then you're likely to be on quite a good track, because a diversified fund over a 10, 20, 30-year period historically has tended to yield positive returns that have in fact enhanced your pension value and made it very much worthwhile to save and to get the tax benefits of the saving.
And I guess you could say that if obviously with a pension fund, you're going very much for, although you're going for growth and sort of profit, you're also going for safety. So somebody who's got a pension fund could then also potentially have some ISAs that they put in, maybe slightly riskier things that would maybe make even better money, but you know that you've got your pension there that will give you your basic money later on. Would you say that that's a way to approach it?
I think that is certainly reasonable. I think with investments that are considered higher risk, you really need to accept that that risk means that you could get no return. And so if you are comfortable with that, then it is possible for you to adopt that type of strategy. I certainly wouldn't recommend it for anyone inside their pension. Pension investments should be diversified. And I think if you are approaching retirement, you should also consider whether you want to even reduce your risk level so that you are not exposed to market volatility, particularly at a time when you want to start making withdrawals. I think the high risk investments that you make, regardless of which asset class that is, and I won't speculate on the various ones that people may be tempted with, those should be constrained to pockets of money that you are happy to lose, because that is frankly the way that you should do it without gambling with your pension.
Yeah, absolutely. Jessica, do you find that your readers are shocked when they hear what their pension funds are investing their money in? Are they surprised to hear that they're invested in the stock market, for example?
Often, yes. I mean, the Telegraph readers are quite clued up on these things, and often they're between their 50s and 70s. So they've done a lot of research into it, and they often save into SIPs, self-invested personal pensions as well. And that's where I find they often take more risk. They'll keep a lot of it invested in stocks and different funds. Mostly, especially approaching retirement, they go towards dividend stocks that pay out good dividends, income stocks, and that sort of thing, because they need to rely on that income to keep coming through. And I think, from all I speak to quite a few financial advisors as well, and that's the kind of thing they then get told to do. So yeah, I think that's the risk that they take with that. But I think it was about a month ago, I wrote a bigger piece on the fact that people are being forced to take more risk in the stock market the older they get, more than they used to, because bonds aren't paying out. Government bonds and corporate bonds just aren't paying out the way they used to decades ago. So to match the returns, the past returns, you need to take more risk on, which means investing more in the stock market later on. And that's just a product of markets at the moment.
Yes, Romy, are you having to do this? Because when I look at the bond market, I'm thinking, who would invest? Who would put money into bonds? They're hopeless. And somebody said to me, well, it's pension funds, they have to. What is the situation there for you?
So we work with some of the world's largest money managers. So we work with BlackRock and State Street and Legal in general, and we rely quite intensively on them to set the appropriate investment strategy over time. Bonds, need to be evaluated within a longer term context. I would say that, over the past couple of years, with interest rates being incredibly low, of course, you're not going to get, the most fantastic returns on bond portfolios, but over a very long period of time, they have been proven to diversify the returns from the stock market. And so you would expect that if your stock market investments went down, then perhaps your bond investments would perform better. And certainly that, we did see some of that in the markets, when we had severe market volatility. What tends to happen is that investors kind of flock to safety. And safety is perceived as government bonds because governments can continue to issue new money. So in times of downturn in particular, they can actually still act as quite a good mitigator against the stock market. I certainly, don't believe that it's very popular these days to put all of your retirement savings into bonds, but I do think that a portion of your overall portfolio allocated to bonds probably still makes sense.
Oh, great. Kerry's added, is the 25% added every year or at the end? Romy, how about that?
Yep. So with PensionBee, it's added pretty much instantly. So as soon as you make your contribution, you get your top up.
Yes, absolutely. And now also Kerry says, I'm looking to move into sustainable investment pension funds. Any advice on this? I'm going to go back to you again, Romy, because I know that you do one of those, and then I'll speak to David about that.
Yes, and actually the views on this have really evolved over the past couple of years. We were one of the first pension providers to offer a sustainable investing option back in 2017. And what sustainable meant back then is that you would probably still be invested in oil companies, but only the ones that have promised to change over time. And what we've increasingly found over the past year or two is that people just don't really believe that and increasingly want to go fossil fuel free. So earlier this year, actually, we launched the fossil fuel free pension, which doesn't invest any of your money into the oil producers, and is now also increasingly excluding any companies that offer oil services to those oil companies as savers' views evolve. The reality is your pension is one of the most powerful changes that you can make, to the way that you live your life, and have a huge impact on the environment as well. It can be a lot easier than going vegan, than reducing your holiday consumptions, and so on. It's an incredibly powerful tool.
Oh, that's great. David, what, because I'm guessing you get a lot of clients now saying, I want sustainable pension, I want sustainable this and that. What's your response to that?
I think it's great. It used to be something that a few years ago you had an ethical fund, and it was a couple of pension providers had the ethical funds, and they were a little bit sullied because the performance of them was not so great as some of the other funds that have their money invested in other things that maybe not so wholesome. But what we've really noticed, particularly over the last 6 months, and every week now, we're getting a question about something called ESG. And ESG is your environmental, your social, and your governance. So we're starting to see this buzzword starting to appear where people are actually going, well, actually, I can do my bit with my pension. I can do my bit with my investments. And you can invest environmentally, socially, and governance, and you can be more responsible by voting with your feet with your pension. But for a lot of people, they don't really know what their pension is invested in. And I think that what's going to be happening now, these ESG funds are going to be becoming far more into the mainstream. They're going to get more and more popular. They're going to start performing better than what they have done before. And it's a good thing to do. We talk to clients now and say to them, well, actually, about these ESG funds, how do you feel about this? And then you get the client say, actually, I would like to do my bit. I've got an electric car. I buy the environmentally biodegradable washing powder. I do all that. And I buy the organic cotton. I want to do my bit. And actually, that motivates them. But it's a great thing to actually get invested in. But it's one of those things that we're going to start seeing more and more of. And as the demand increases for it as well, a lot more fund providers are going to be actually offering these type of ESG funds, ethical funds, environmentally aware funds. And it can only be a good thing. And we can all do our little bit. So it's a good thing.
Great. Hillary says, I'm wondering if I should save as much as I can into a pension, or is it worth keeping some money back, some savings back, and putting some of that into a stocks and shares ISA as well? I'm back to you, David. What do you think?
It's financial planning is about balance. So the thing is, if you put your money into a pension, Hillary, it's gone. You're not going to see that money until you're 55 or moving to 57. It's locked away. So what you need to have is you need to have your short-term money. So I often say it's your emergency fund. You need to have 3 to 6 months worth of instant cash that you can just pull on. Then having it, if you've got enough money to then do a stocks and shares ISA, you're looking at a 5-year or more plan with the stocks and shares ISA, and your pension is for your future self. And it's about balance. So what you wouldn't do is put all your money into a pension, and then suddenly your boiler packs up, and then the washing machine goes, and the fridge freezer, because everything happens in threes. Yeah. So then you start drawing on your credit card or something. That's not a good idea. You need to do the bit, and also keep reviewing it and looking at it as well. So once you've got your short-term money sorted, then invest into an ISA and also look at the pension as well. So you're paying your future self. And it's about balance, and financial planning is all about that. It's short, medium and long-term goals. So the solution isn't all or nothing, it's some of everything. So it's a bit of a sitting on the hedge there, sitting on the fence, not the hedge, sitting on the fence answer, but hopefully that made it a little bit clearer.
Yeah, good one. I often say that it depends what kind of person you are, because if you're the sort of person that's going to dip into whatever it is, then sometimes it's a good idea to have quite a bit in your pension, because it sort of looks after your future self, protects your future self from your current self, you know. But,
it's a good point. And you're right, it does. Once it's in there, the good thing is it locks it away. The bad thing is it locks it away. So it's a double-edged sword. But yeah, it's about balance. That's all it is.
Great. Now, Nicholas says, and this one's for Romy, is there a minimum amount that can be contributed to a pension each month or quarter?
Not at PensionBee. So we often find that people are happy to pay in more one month and want to not pay in anything at all in the next month. It's really flexible and up to you, and you should put in, what you can afford and what aligns with your goals.
Great. Actually, that reminds me, speaking about pensions and ISAs and everything, David, I like to talk about investing for children, and pensions. Obviously, we know about junior ISAs, but pensions can be a rather good one for children as well, can't they?
They're brilliant, yeah, and not a lot of people know that you can do them. So you still get tax relief. So a lot of people think that tax relief is only applicable if you're earning and you're a taxpayer, but no, you could have for my godchildren I mentioned earlier on, they had pensions from when they were 2 years old. So the mum and dad are paying into a pension. Now you're capped as to how much you can pay in. So when I talk about gross and net, so we're talking 3,600 is the gross figure. That's after you've had your tax relief. So the net figure is 2,880. So you could have a parent or indeed a grandparent, because sometimes the grandparents like to do something, pay into a pension for a child. Now, a lot of people think, well, why would you do that? Because I'd rather they had the money and it's up. But actually, it's a massive impact on a setting up for their future, because you've got that compound effect of the growth where you've invested money into a fund, working for you tax efficiently, you put the money in and you let it roll, because you can afford to take a bit more risk, because they're not going to need the money for years. And in this day and age where here we are talking about the fact that a lot of people haven't probably done enough for their pensions, having that massive leg up at the beginning of your life where they're not going to know what it is that you've done for years, but they will thank you for it in the years to come, because suddenly they've got this amount of money. And there are various figures banded around. I think there was one I read once that if you paid in from when they were 1 to they're 18 years old and you left it, by the time they reach 65, they've already got £1 million in the pension pot because of that compound effect. It's massive. Now, it depends on the risk, it depends on affordability, but it's a really good thing to do because they get tax relief at the basic rate. It's a great thing to do, so long as you're happy again to tie the money up for their long-term future.
Jessica, there's also, of course, junior ISAs. So, I mean, if you had the money, you could do a bit of both, couldn't you? I guess you could do a pension for your baby and a junior ISA, maybe.
You could, and it's a good idea. As David was saying, it's best to start early, and the earlier you start, the longer it has to grow. So, there was some stats saying that putting in, let's say, you amass £20,000 in this over a 40-year period with investment growth, often you'd get about £420,000. A report I received earlier said, and that's if you save up to 20k and then just stop and leave it invested often. I mean, obviously it depends where it's invested, but that's just compounded interest. So it's, yeah, it just shows over a long period of time how worth it can really be.
Romy, we're talking about, leaving the money for a long period of time and the joy and wonder of compound interest. Now, we hear a lot, and I'm sure Jessica's written a lot about this, about young people feeling that there's no point in them saving. There's a bit of there seems to be a sense that they'll never get there. What do you feel about young people's prospects of saving enough for their future?
We tend to find that young people are actually incredibly diligent and disciplined when it comes to their savings. And I think they have been some of the primary beneficiaries of automatic enrollment. So have actually, gotten a pension in their 20s, have seen that pension grow potentially over the last 8 to 10 years. And so actually for young people, I think there's quite a lot of hope because they've automatically started early, which, many people haven't had the opportunity to do. We also find them to be highly engaged and interested in what their pension is investing in. In fact, a lot of the demand for going fossil fuel free will come from some of the younger generations, not exclusively by any means, but they often are the drivers of change, and having them engaged and interested in their pension provision can only be a good thing.
Yes, and speaking about, actually, Vanessa has put a question here. Is it too late to start saving like this for your children if they are 16 or 17? Or will they miss out on benefits they could have received with junior ISAs and child pensions? David, I'll ask you about that.
If we're talking about saving into a pension, Vanessa, just do it. Honestly, if you can. It is so hard. Some of the people that we see as day-to-day as clients, the amount of clients that will say, well, I started a pension when I was younger because my dad or my mum told me to. And they're really grateful for having had that advice because it's their future self that they're saving money for. Even if it's just a little amount, you can do it, as you say, with PensionBee, with virtually no money at all. You can just still start something. And it's about progress, not perfection. So just get them going. And also they will start taking interest in it as well, because they'll be used to this language of pensions. Engage them with what it is that you're actually doing and show them the statements maybe. And say, look, this is a pension. What's it all about? There's plenty of, I say the kids today, 60 to 17, get them on YouTube. You'll find loads of people talking about what pensions are on there. Make sure it's the right source, of course. And there's also moneyhelper.org as well, the government website. That's great at putting things in really simple language. So yeah, Vanessa, I wouldn't say it's too late to start at all. It's better to do something than actually not do anything at all. And something's better than nothing.
I've actually gave money to my nephew and my nieces for their Christmas and birthday, and said, look, here's a SIP. The thing is, they're all just about over 18, so I couldn't set it up for them, but I was able to say, look, here's a good one, and maybe that, and you might like to think doing a SIP or a LISA, and this is what, and that can be really helpful for them for later on, I think. What do you find, Jessica, for the ideas that people have for for investing for their children? Do you find that this is the thing that they can do from 16, 17, 18?
We get people starting at all ages. And we also get people saying that when the kids leave home, they start putting more into their own pensions as well, which they then plan to gift to their children later on. So it's not, it's not just one way of doing it. A leading think tank earlier this year came out and said that people should be definitely increasing the amount they put away after both children, or however many you have, leave home and go to university or start working and move out, because you've suddenly got that extra income that you can use towards it. And whether you put that into directly into a pension for them or into your own, and wait until you can start to access that pension at 55 or older, you can then start to gift it on. So yeah, there's several ways of passing on the money.
And speaking of, in your 50s and whatever, say, for example, you are sort of 50s, 60s, and you still, honestly, you haven't got enough. There are lots of ways of making extra money at that point, aren't there? I mean, Jessica, you must come up with a lot of these, because there are more and more people, it seems to me, who are at least working part-time into their 70s, even 80s. My mum, for example, ran her business until 6 months before she passed on. And she would say, don't take my business away from me. Do you find this from your readers, Jessica?
Yeah, especially since the pandemic, because it's made flexible working so much easier. And so a lot of people I speak to find it better and much more easier to work from home than they did before. So they've said suddenly, you know, they can keep working for years. And actually quite a few people have extended their working lives. Also, it's forced others to retire earlier as well, if they lost their jobs. That we're seeing both ends of it, so really split between people there. But you're right, quite a few people are finding that they can't afford to retire just yet. They want to, but they can't, when they really look at the numbers. And so either they're taking, you know, part-time jobs, or they're continuing their jobs and phasing it out, just taking fewer hours. And that's something that is becoming more and more popular.
Romy, if people are putting off retirement, that's going to be a good thing for your pension pot, isn't it? And I guess with pension drawdown, you can leave the money there and just take a little bit out here and there, so it lasts longer.
Yes, generally speaking, the longer you wait to start taking money out of your personal pension, the more opportunity it has to continue growing. And when you do take money out, you want to limit that to what you actually need. What we sometimes find is that people will automatically withdraw their entire 25% tax-free cash amount in one go, just because that's the amount that tax-free, and it's almost been set as a default by the government. But actually, you could benefit hugely from taking out a portion of that 25% tax-free cash and leaving the rest invested for a longer period of time, so it can continue to grow and grow and grow inside your pension. And if you don't access your pension and you do pass away, if you pass away before the age of 75, then your pension will pass tax-free to your beneficiaries. So, you know, I do think that a lot of people should take that into account as well.
Carrie's just asked about that, interestingly. She said she's an only child from a very small family. If something were to happen to me, she says, is there any way I can ensure that I can pass on my pensions to my godchildren? Is that possible, Remy?
Yeah, absolutely. You can set up your beneficiaries. We make it really easy for you to do that inside your Beehive. You can set it up in a couple of minutes and just say, this is how I would like my pension to be split. We find that a lot of people don't do that. It can be complicated to get the paper forms and then return the paper forms, and your pension is automatically excluded from your estate. So you know it is treated under slightly separate rules, and you know you want to be on top of who actually inherits that money.
Yeah, because as you say, it's outside of your estate, so it's actually quite a tax-free. In terms of inheritance tax, it's quite a good thing to put extra money in your pension for your children. Or
a lot of people use it that way. Absolutely.
And finally, David, are you finding that people are generally retiring later now? People are living longer, they're more active. Are you finding that people are doing that, or is it very much the sort of half and half, sort of retire but carry on working 2 days a week kind of thing?
It's a bit of a blend, if I'm being honest. So what we find is that when sort of looking at my parents now, when they retired, they were both teachers, so it was a very, what I call a hard retirement. So they finished school on the Friday, and then Monday they were retired, and that was it. Whereas what we're finding now is that people are saying, well, I can go down to 3 days a week. You know, I can do a little bit less. I want to do to. But I think the important thing is when you're looking at retirement is that I always ask the question of people, okay, what are you retiring from? And they go, my job, and I'm getting rid of this, and my boss and everything else. So what are you going to retire to? So it's really a good idea when you are retiring to have stuff to do when you get there and plan for the retirement, because often people can be put off from it because they're thinking, I'm scared. I don't know if I've got enough money. I don't know what I'm going to do. And it's about doing the things that you probably always wanted to do, like having more holidays and stuff, but also maybe giving back in terms of volunteering. We've got people that are doing that. We've got people walking dogs for people, cat sitting, all sorts of things, but having that purpose of a point of your why when you actually get to retirement. But yeah, we tend to find now that people tend to phase it a little bit more. But also what's been really interesting over the period of time over the last 18 months is where people have been working from home more, is a little bit of try before you buy. Because they've been at home thinking, well, this is what retirement might feel like, but I just won't have the salary. And I don't know if I want to get on the train and go into London anymore. I don't know if I quite want to do that. So we've had people accelerate their retirement plans purely because of what's happened during the coronavirus as well. So it's been interesting conversations with people. It's certainly given people a lot of time to think.
Yes, as Jessica pointed out, it's an interesting time generally, I think, for pensions and for savings. Well, we've come to the end of our webinar now. So thank you so much to all my lovely panelists, so helpful. Romina Savova, CEO of our sponsors, PensionBee.com. Go to PensionBee for all your pension needs, frankly. And it's a fun website as well. That's one of the reasons why we like them. MoneyMagpie and PensionBee, it kind of goes together. Jessica Beard, who's a pension specialist from the Telegraph newspaper, and David Braithwaite, who's a financial advisor at Citrus Financial. Thank you everyone for turning up. It's been lovely to have you. Great to see you all, and hope to see you at the next one. Goodbye.